A visit to heaven with my mom. On April 19th, 2024, I had an astral adventure while I slept. I made a visit to heaven with my mother, who at the time was still physically alive, to visit my grandmother, Angie, who is my mother's mother, and who had crossed into heaven years ago. I believe I was given this experience in preparation for my mom's impending physical death and life transition after living over 3 years with terminal liver bile duct cancer. I found the entire experience to be deeply healing for me. Here is what happened. I found myself standing alongside my mother, who was in her wheelchair, wearing her oxygen tubing on her face. We stood looking at my grandmother, who had her back to us a few yards away. She was busy rearranging pots of white flowers. As I looked at the multitude of flowers, I realized they were the most beautiful I had ever seen. Most of them were pure white and sparkled brilliantly and were varieties I was unaware of. There was also a large rack of shelves with hundreds of seed packets of even more flowers yet to be planted. I wondered what my grandmother was doing with them, and I also wanted some for my own garden back home. Thinking Grandma could spare just a few, I asked her if I could have a couple of them. Without turning around, in a quiet voice, she said, "No, honey. You cannot have any of these flowers." Taken aback, I could hardly believe my grandmother would turn down giving her own granddaughter just a few of her multitude of flowers. But then I realized that many of them were varieties I'd never seen and must be very rare and expensive. So I asked my grandmother again, "Grandma, I don't mean to ask for them for free. I will pay you for them. Whatever the cost is, I don't care. They're worth it. They're so beautiful." This time, Grandma turned around to face me, and I suddenly felt her wordless answer throughout my entire being. I instantly understood that these flowers were not for me. They were being planted for my mom, and none of them would grow where I lived, because I was in heaven. It was then that I realized where I was, and that I didn't belong there. I felt as though I had woken in the middle of this astral experience and was now lucidly aware of everything that was happening and fully awake. Then Grandma spoke out loud, saying, "And it would make me very sad if any of these flowers were for you. It's not your time for these flowers yet. You are not finished with your physical life." I understood, and suddenly felt very out of place, standing there in heaven with my mom and Grandma. I then asked, "Grandma, where are you going to plant all these flowers for Mom? There are thousands." My grandma then turned and gestured broadly outward with her arm to the green rolling meadow all around. "Oh my goodness, Grandma, that's a lot of acres. Will you get them all planted in time for Mom before she arrives here?" To which my grandma replied in a soft, gentle voice, "Yes, dear, it will all be done in time." Then Grandma said to me, "I have to talk to your mother for a bit now. I'll be right back." And with that, they walked a few yards away and began a deep conversation with their backs to me. Now I felt the full weight of awkwardness and wondered what to do with myself while they talked. I wondered why I was even there to begin with. So I began to look around. The first thing I noticed, down to the left of me, was a set of 3 wide white marble stairs. They were beautiful, with delicate white baby's breath flowers growing between them. I could see they led upward to the entrance of a building of some kind, with Grecian-style white marble pillars on either side at the top. I could not see more than this. I noticed that growing amongst the baby's breath flowers were 3 thistle plants sticking up. I thought it odd that there would be weeds growing in heaven, and knew they didn't belong. So I figured it was the least I could do to pull them out while I waited for my mom and Grandma to finish their talk. I hesitated to grab the first one, knowing thistles were prickly and often deep-rooted and difficult to pull out, but I decided to just try. And to my amazement, not only did the plant not stick my hand with its prickles, but it came out of the ground easily and fully. Then I noticed something strange and wonderful. As I pulled it out of the ground, something in my heart released at the same time. I knew instantly that some wound within me regarding my relationship with my mother was being healed. I pulled the other 2 thistles out with the same effect. I understood they represented my letting go or releasing any old hurts that I may have unconsciously been holding against my mother. My heart felt light and loving. I hadn't even known these thistles were within me, and I was relieved they were gone. At this time, my mom and grandma returned from their talk, and my grandma said to me, "Even though you cannot take any of these flowers with you, there is one thing you can do. You can help me plant them here. I'll give you a small area to plant the ones of your choosing for her." I was elated by this and felt deeply honored to be granted permission to do this. It felt like a rare exception was being made for me. I immediately selected an area and knelt down to plant what I thought were some of the most beautiful flowers in my own special area as my personal contribution to my mom's garden in heaven. Then the scene shifted entirely. I was now standing at the top of a grassy hill with my mom and dad and all 3 of my brothers and our spouses and children. Our whole immediate family was there. Mom was in the center of us, again in her wheelchair with her oxygen tube in her nose, and we were deciding which path we should go with Mom. We had 2 choices. We could take the path to our right that was flat, but much longer, winding, and filled with roots, rocks, and ruts. Though level, it looked difficult to navigate. The other path, right in front of us, which was much shorter, but was very steep and went straight down the grassy hill. I somehow understood that the difficult rocky path represented a path filled with grievances. Each difficult element symbolized something negative from our lifetime in relationship to Mom we were holding on to, and the grassy path leading straight down the hill symbolized all of us letting go of everything and working together in peace to love and help Mom during her transition. My dad then said to us, "We'll never get Mom's wheelchair through all those rocks and ruts on the longer level path. We've got to go straight down the grassy hill. We can do it if we all work together." We all agreed. No one wanted to navigate the rougher path, so we gathered around Mom's wheelchair to support her down the steep hill. I walked in front, holding back her wheelchair with my body to keep it from going out of control. Dad held the hand grips from behind, and my brothers walked on either side, hands lightly touching the wheelchair to be able to grab it at any moment if it gained too much momentum. All the grandchildren and our spouses formed a semicircle behind us and followed. As I set foot down the hillside path, we gained in speed, finding no traction at all. We all began sliding as a group, faster and faster, and I became alarmed at our speed. I then discovered that if I kept my feet perfectly flat, I could just glide down the hill. The ground was smooth and the short grass was yielding. We had a lot of momentum, but we were navigating the steep hillside without any problems. About halfway down, I called over my shoulder to ask my mom if she was okay. I didn't know if she would be scared of the pace of our descent. Laughingly, she answered, "I'm doing just fine. This is so exciting." Relieved, we finally reached the bottom and came to a stop. I then turned around to check on Mom. She held her hand out to me to help her out of the wheelchair and simultaneously took off her oxygen tubing. She stood and walked past me to continue on down the now level, gentle, grassy path. I could see it rounded a broad corner up ahead, where there was a line of bushes and small trees on either side, marking a boundary. And there, standing across the path, even with the trees, were 3 beings of light. They were huge, about 10 or 15 feet tall, and shaped like ovals that came to a point at the top and bottom. They felt like loving, wise guides waiting to escort Mom. They were there to help her cross the threshold between the physical and spirit realm. I then tried to see what lay beyond the 3 light beings and shrubbery on either side of them. I could just glimpse my grandma standing there, not far off in the distance, with other people among the thousands of white flowers she had planted. The garden was complete. And it was at this time I understood that each white flower symbolized a kind or loving thought, deed, or word my mother had said or done throughout her lifetime. I was overwhelmed with love at the sight. And there the dream ended, and I woke. And later, when I told my mom about this dream, I asked that when her time comes and she enters the welcome garden her mother had planted, to please look for the little area I planted for her too. I hope she finds it beautiful. I love you, Mom. Thank you for everything.